Professor Butch Ware is standing to become the next governor of California. I talked to him about his radical politics, the legacy of Malcolm X, and why he believes liberals can be as fascistic as conservatives. Now, many may disagree with his radicalism, but his views are nonetheless as important as others to be heard.
What is white supremacy?
They were hanging people from trees. They were shooting white voting rights activists.
I actually talk about Trump's America and the state of Trump's America.
His flirtations with Nazism. White liberal is a fox. It bares its teeth. You think that it's smiling at you, but you are on the menu. An open enemy is less dangerous to you than a concealed enemy. The state of Israel was created for the salvation of Western interests. The truth is that they made this monster. They cannot defend us against it. This is a white Jewish population being empowered by white imperialists to knock brown Arabs off their land. It is a kind of madness. Malcolm says, we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. You put them first, and they put you last, and that makes you a chump. We're picking through the scraps of what the billionaire class lets us have.
Professor Butch Ware, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's really, really good to be back, especially since we're here in Santa Barbara.
That's
I got the blessing of hosting you on my home turf, so alhamdulillah.
It's Jazakallah khair, and I think this is a beautiful place, mashallah. It's really a wonderful state, and Santa Barbara looks amazing.
It's a gorgeous place to be. I'm blessed to be teaching at UC Santa Barbara, and for those that haven't been here, the ocean is always in one hand and the mountains in the other.
Absolutely.
You have the reminder of out of water we were created, and then the mountain will be leveled. So I feel like I'm between the day of Alastu bi Rabbikum and Yawm al-Qiyamah, and this narrow, beautiful stretch of time in a land in between the two.
Allah, Jazakallah khair. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. Now, we had a conversation just prior to the election, the general election, and alhamdulillah, I think it was a really interesting conversation. We delved into a lot of your thinking about US politics, and I want to build on that today, as well as your thinking about your own philosophy, like your own ideas and what underpins your idea, your understanding of justice. So I want to focus a lot on that today, and actually talk about Trump's America and the state of Trump's America. But maybe if we can start with, I think a question I asked you last time, maybe it was the first question, in fact, where we spoke about Malcolm X. I mean, I recently reread Malcolm X's autobiography because I think it's a phenomenal book, and I feel that I read it originally when I was a teenager, and I think I got a lot more from it, possibly, as someone who's sort of developed, let's say, in life. I feel that you're someone to speak to about Malcolm X. You became a Muslim at the age of 15 after reading Malcolm X's book. Just tell me, what does Malcolm X mean to you? Like, what lessons should we really be taking from Malcolm X?
I mean, for me personally, like, just Malcolm is, like, at distance, my mentor, role model, teacher, guide. I mean, you alluded to it. So when I was 15 years old, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X for the first time. I've read it many times since. But that reading of it changed my life. I read that book cover to cover in one night. Could not put that book down. And I was up till dawn. And I wanted what Malcolm had at the end of that book, because what Malcolm was, like, very clear about all of the things that America had done to him, and also what he had become, so that he was also honest about what his own hands had done, right? So he was talking about the fact that his father was killed by white supremacists, laid down on a railroad track. His mother driven to madness by the fact that the insurance companies won't pay out, the state won't support. He goes into foster care, ends up, a hustler, a criminal, and then sees the light and gets transformed. And that spoke to me at a really, really deep level, because I had known intimately a lot of those same dark places that Malcolm described. My father was a locksmith with a 6th grade education who hustled, sold whatever he needed to sell on the side in order to make ends meet. My mother was 15 years old, pregnant with me, told by her high school guidance counselor to abort the child because she was pregnant by a black man in Washington, D.C. in 1973. And she was told that she would be strung out on heroin and prostituting herself by the time she was 17 if she had the baby. Me.
Wow.
So white supremacy is literally trying to take me out before I get here. And for the first 8 or 9 years of my life, we never live at the same street address for a whole calendar year. It's in and out of public housing, battered women's shelter, my dad's locksmith van sometime. So I had seen just some really hard, difficult circumstances, some of the same ones Malcolm knew. But then the light of Islam finds Malcolm.
Yeah.
And I realized that, like, if this Islam can bring Malcolm out of that, then he could find me too. So I literally went out the next day and checked out an English translation of the Quran from my public school library. Still haven't slept, mind you.
Yes.
Read that book cover to cover the next night. And I told my mom when she got home from work, I said, Mom, I'm a Muslim. I want you to drive me to a mosque so I can make my shahada. And she said, that's fine, baby, but it's gonna have to wait till the end of the week because I have to work. And so Malcolm's autobiography was, what brought me into Islam, but it's also what brought me into the Black liberation tradition, which then Malcolm was also my teacher about how to transmute all of that pain and all of that trauma from what capitalism and imperialism and white supremacy had done to him and had done to me. And instead of just, suffering in that and allowing it to turn me into things I didn't want to become, it became this, vehicle for turning that into resistance. So whenever I'm trying to assess political circumstances, Malcolm is my teacher again. So I'm always going back to Malcolm to think about how he would be reading or how he might be reading contemporary circumstances and what his life and his story have for us in this contemporary moment. So there's a lot, I think, that, a reading of Malcolm can bring into our current political moment for sure.
I mean, what would Malcolm X have said about electoral politics?
So this is a common misconception about Malcolm. Malcolm defined himself as, he said, I'm a Black Muslim revolutionary. But Malcolm was actually deeply interested in utilizing electoral political processes for organizing purposes and for movement work. Yeah. So 1964, the Ballot or the Bullet, Malcolm delivers this speech at least twice. We have records of him delivering a speech under the same title twice. And there's differences in each, but in both, the argument that he's making is actually one that we are going to have our liberation, whether it is at the ballot box or whether it is in the streets. And he's essentially saying to the United States of America, do you want to do this the easy way or do you want to do this the hard way? Yeah. And so he's actually proposing a comprehensive electoral political strategy for the Black community that is invested in Black liberation. So Malcolm says in one of those versions, he says, we're going to knock on every door in Harlem and we are going to register every Black face behind every door, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but independent. So Malcolm was already seeing beyond the duopoly, beyond Team Blue and Team Red. But the Ballot or the Bullet wasn't just, a threat to white America that you need to give the Black person their freedom. It was also a threat to the Black community that refused to use electoral politics for organizing, because Malcolm said in that speech again, he said, whatever Black face behind that door does not have the responsibility to register themselves to vote, we are going to have strong words for them, or we might even run them out of town. Right. So the Ballot or the Bullet was not just a threat aimed at America, but it was also saying to the Black community, you need to utilize electoral political strategies in order to leverage community power for liberation. And I think that that's a misconception that people have, that Black revolutionaries don't utilize electoral politics, but many did. The Panthers, who were inspired by Malcolm, Huey P. Newton ran for Congress not once but twice. Bobby Seale, the other co-founder of the Black Panther Party, ran for mayor of Oakland in 1973. Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, another great Black revolutionary thinker, he said, voting every 4 years is the height of bourgeois hypocrisy. He said, but I would shed my blood for the vote, and I have, because I know the vote is how I organize my people. So they saw it as one tool in a revolutionary toolkit. Yeah.
Well, that's really, really interesting. I mean, do you feel that Malcolm X is misunderstood today by both those who want to co-opt him into some sort of liberal movement, but also those who don't quite understand the nuances of what you've just described there. He was a revolutionary, but someone who was willing to use the electoral processes for his ends.
Yeah, he was a revolutionary. He was also, he was also raised as a farm boy. He was a pragmatist, and he often processed things through rural idioms that were very practical in the way that they understood things. So, for example, those that are trying to co-opt Malcolm for a bunch of liberal agendas. Malcolm said that there are a lot of white people that are trying to solve the problems of the Negro, but none of them call themselves liberals. And Malcolm said in '64, he said the white liberal is the most dangerous thing in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah. Right? So Malcolm was never a liberal. He didn't believe in liberal politics. He didn't believe in conservative politics. Malcolm said of the liberal, he said, the white liberal is a fox. It bares its teeth. You think that it's smiling at you, but you are on the menu. The white conservative is a wolf. When it bares its teeth, it's into a vicious snarl that leaves the black man with no illusion as to where he stands. So Malcolm conceived of the Democrats and Republicans, and this is why he's saying in the Ballot or the Bullet, I'm going to register everyone not as a Democrat or as a Republican. He conceived of these as two kind of capitalist, white supremacist, imperialist parties that differed only in the way that they hunt. Right? One hunts by guile and by cunning, coming up to you so that it can get close, pretending to be your friend. Whereas the other one, it's just naked brute force. And in Malcolm's estimation, the one that hunts through deception is the more dangerous to you. An open enemy is less dangerous to you than a concealed enemy. And so when Malcolm said the white liberal is the most dangerous thing in the Western Hemisphere, that was '64. What were white conservatives doing in '64? They were hanging people from trees. They were shooting white voting rights activists. They were turning dogs and fire hoses on protesters. But Malcolm was clear in his assessment of what was more dangerous. And if you look at Trump's America right now, you see people responding as though Trump's conservatism, his fascism, his flirtations with Nazism are the fundamental problem. And as though somehow liberals and Democrats are going to be the solution to that. That's what these No Kings rallies have been about. But Malcolm, I don't believe, would have had any, illusions about the fact that, in point of fact, Team Blue is every bit as dangerous for any real prospects of liberation as Team Red is. And that the way that we organize, and Muslims should be paying attention to this, the way that we organize is outside of this duopoly structure.
We have started a water tracking program because of the onset of the failure of the short rains. These trips that you see behind me, the truck, twice a week is able to sustain those livelihoods and keep children in school.
Without the intervention of Baitulmaal and the government, we couldn't have been alive today because of the severe water shortage. They have brought us water.
Today we are going to also to Wajir West to look at some programs they have done and see how we can support them further. We're also intending to do a faith-based hospital, inshallah, in Wajir County, which is going to support this community greatly, immensely.
Visit btml.us/thinkingmuslim to learn more and give.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating, and I want to talk about the duopoly structure.
Please.
But let's see it, and let's delve into that because, of course, I mean the UK system is somewhat different. We've got a parliamentary democracy, and in a way that there are very many more ways by which we can leverage our power, let's say, in the UK system than it seems like in the American system. I mean, I spoke to someone recently who said that he would like to vote for a third party or an independent. The reality is that in most electoral districts, it's really a choice between the Reds and the Blues, right? It's a choice between the Democrats and Republicans. And given that choice, there needs to be an effort to try to change the political party which is the most accessible. And for him, it was the Democrats. And so his strategy was to fight democratic primaries across the country and try through that process to get candidates that are going to be far more aware of our issues or interests of the Muslim community in this particular instance. Like, what do you say about that?
How has that worked for Muslims so far? How has attempting to utilize the Democrats for Muslim purposes, has all of that influence peddling prevented genocide? Did that stop Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Palestinians? It is a kind of madness, and Einstein defined madness as repeating the same actions and expecting a different outcome. Minority groups of all kinds have been barking up that Democrat tree since Malcolm tried to warn them in '64 and have found the same result, which is nothing. There's no affirmative action left. There's no DEI left for women that were interested in protecting reproductive rights. Democrats didn't protect any of that, and the reason is that they have no interest in actually serving minority communities or oppressed communities, least of all the Muslims. They slaughtered Palestinians like animals and then muzzled Palestinians like animals, not even letting a Palestinian speak from the stage at the DNC. For me, Malcolm in '64 understood what the Democrats are, and a lot of Muslims, some Muslims still haven't caught up. In '64, Malcolm said of the Democrats to the Black community, he said, "You put them first and they put you last. And that makes you a chump. That makes you a political chump." Those were Malcolm's exact words. Well, I'm tired of being chumped. And the good news for the American Muslim community specifically is that the American Muslim community actually saw through this ruse in 2024. The exit polling conducted by CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, nationwide, indicated that 53% of American Muslims voted for the Green Party, voted for the Stein-Ware ticket in 2024. Yeah. Only 20% for Team Blue genocide, only 20% for Team Red fascism. Yeah. And the rest was split between other parties. So the reality is that the Muslims have already opted out of this duopoly plantation. It's just that usually Muslim leaders that have sunken costs with the Democrats are going to be the ones arguing to get you back onto that plantation and to work within the system. But that's because just like the hypocrites of Medina, they have sunken costs with the Zionists. And it is difficult for them to accept that a new emancipatory, liberatory movement has emerged, and that the day that today is not the day that yesterday was. Nobody wants the Muslims to know that they already elected us. If everybody in America voted the way the Muslims vote, then I'd be sitting in the White House right now. So they don't want you to know. And the reason is that it was the first time that any major ethnic or religious demographic voted outside of the two-party system in 150 years. The last time there was a big party switch this way was when African Americans went from being Lincoln Republicans to being FDR Democrats in the 1930s, but they stayed in the binary system. Muslims have already opted out, and now you got all of these so-called Muslim leaders trying to sheepdog people back onto one of these plantations, or using conservative cultural issues to try to sheepdog people back onto, team fascism, team Trump. I'm sorry. Malcolm would be having none of it, and I ain't having none of it either, to be perfectly honest.
But I suppose the Muslim community in America. I mean, you're a small minority in this country, and in order for third parties to really thrive, there needs to be support from across
multiple constituencies,
multiple groups. I mean,
100%.
How despite what you said about Muslims and their support for the Green Party didn't really increase its vote share in the last election.
Yeah, part of that had to do with the fact that the Democrats sued to keep the Green Party off of ballots in the largest, most populous states. So they were successful in New York, they were successful in Illinois, and that massively depressed the actual number because they're deathly afraid of what an actual independent third party vote would do.
Please, if you're in New York,
you
would not have a Green Party candidate on your ballot?
We didn't.
Really?
We were not on the ballot. They sued us off the ballot in New York. They sued us off the ballot in Illinois and several other states.
This was the Democratic Party.
This was the Democrats that did this.
Wow.
Yes. And so they have been at war with actual democracy for, an extended period of time. But I will agree with the fact that even with that being said, that, the Green Party has not traditionally done the work of building infrastructure on the ground in community to be more successful and more competitive in national elections, which is part of the reason why I decided to run for governor in the state of California, to build that infrastructure in the largest and most populous state, because it does two things at the same time. One, it strikes at the heart of the duopoly to be competitive in a gubernatorial election. And just for context, right, a Green Party candidate got 47% of the vote against Gavin Newsom in 2003. Like, Greens have been and almost ended Gavin Newsom's career before it started.
Yeah.
So Greens have been very successful in lower level elections and in state elections.
Right.
But even the national electoral outcomes, which some conceived of as disappointing, you have to understand that part of the reason why the Green Party has historically run in those races is because it helps to secure ballot access when the Democrats are always trying to get your ballot access erased. So if you were to try to create a new political party and to get the petitions and signatures, et cetera, that would be necessary to get ballot access nationwide that the Green Party already has, it might cost you $100 million. It might cost you $150 million. There's so many petitions and little rules. They've rigged the system. And that's why no other third party actually has national electoral reach. So understand that when they brought like a new age Black Muslim revolutionary to a position of leadership in the Green Party, they were essentially putting our communities in a position of directing and leading the third largest political party in the United States. And the only one that isn't funded by corporate powers, that isn't controlled by AIPAC, and also has ballot access across the country. So my model is to just continue to build that power and to demonstrate that power, especially in this upcoming electoral cycle, because people aren't going to believe it until they see it, right? And that means you have to do the work of organizing at the ground level. I've been building these, units so that we can knock on every door throughout the state, from San Diego through Humboldt County, because there is truth in the critique that the Green Party has not, done enough in between electoral cycles to really build for power. Well, I'm trying to utilize Malcolm's organizing approach and acumen in our communities more broadly, so that we can get more to Latino vote, more to African American vote, and get to a position where we're competitive in this very electoral cycle.
Right. So you're standing as governor for California.
Correct.
As the candidate for governor of California, and of course Gavin Newsom
termed out.
Right.
Yeah.
So, do you believe that there is is the idea that you're really doing this as a platform for build for organizing? Do you believe in one election cycle you'll be able to win governorship?
Yeah, in the state of California we can. Well, so the reason is that those two parties have rigged things, as they always do, to try to guarantee it's blue versus red in every election.
Yeah.
So they have what's called a jungle primary. Only the top two candidates advance, irrespective of party. And that's supposed to get you one blue versus one red, except in the state of California, because the state leans more towards the left and leans progressive, there are actually as many registered independents as there are registered Republicans. Right. The Republican candidates don't do well in this state, so they're actually very susceptible to an independent political attack. Just for context, the second place finisher in the 2022 gubernatorial election got 17% of the vote. We've run numbers, different scenarios, especially in a split field right now where the Democrats have 7 candidates all running at the same time. We could finish in the first or second position in the state of California with between 13 and 15% of the vote. We're almost guaranteed to make the top 2 if we get 20% of the vote. Just for context, they hide the primary in June, 6-2-2-6, June 2nd, 2026. because of that, the voter turnout is traditionally low. 5.5 million people in a state of 40 million people voted in 2022. Well, what does that mean? There's 1 million Muslims in the state of California, right? It took only 1.5 million votes to get to second place in 2022. If we mobilize the Muslim community and just get decent numbers, 5%, 7%, 10% of targeted demographic groups, if we do well in the 18 to 24 demographic, which is where anti-Zionism is concentrated across the ideological spectrum, then we can coast into second place. And what that would mean is that it's going to be me versus whichever sorry Democrat is left standing on their side of the process. And that would essentially be the end of the duopoly, because they wouldn't be able to hide us anymore. The media is going to have to cover every single speech that I give. And I can talk about this later, but the early returns when we've had open gubernatorial debates is that I've won the votes on best candidate in those debates consistently. Next part about it is that they won't be able to use the argument, you're going to let the state go to the Republicans. They won't be able to use a lesser of two evils argument. So then what will be their argument when it's just green versus blue? Lastly, is that all of those Republican inclined voters or independent voters, when they hear me savaging the corruption and hypocrisy of Team Blue, like a lot of people don't know that in the 2024 electoral cycle, in the last two polls, we were getting more voters voting green from red than we were getting voting green from blue.
Oh, right.
Yes. So it's a perfect storm. All we need is between 15 and 20% of the vote on June 2nd. And the Democrat control over the state of California is very much in play.
Okay, I want to pick up on
Please.
that. So Republicans,
Yes.
you were saying that a good number of Republicans switched to the Green Party. Like,
Correct.
Where's the commonality? Why is it that? Why would Republican voters vote Green?
Because the Green Party is actually not invested in the culture war between blue and red. So I made this argument at a number of points during the presidential campaign. And it was a relatively straightforward argument. I'll tell the slightly longer version of the story on Thinking Muslim because it's got something that is like a particularly interesting for the Muslims. So the first place that I rolled out this argument that I then later used in public speaking engagements was on a flight from Santa Barbara. We have a little airport here, and one of the few places it flies is Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm on my way to Arizona for a connection flight, and I'm seated next to a white couple in their 60s who happen to inform me that they are planning to vote for RFK. And I tell them, well, RFK has actually already gone in with Trump now. And they're like, I guess we'll vote for Trump again. And I said, well, I actually happen to be the Green Party vice presidential candidate, which they got a kick out of. They said, well, what's the Green Party? I said, well, I'll tell you what, let me make my pitch and then you tell me what you think. They're like, go for it. So here was the argument that I made, and this goes to the heart of your question. Yeah. I said, aren't you tired of Democrats calling you racist? That flattened Jennifer Sweet as she listened to it. She said, yeah. She said, I'm not racist. I don't have any racial animosity towards, anybody because of the color of their skin. I said, I know, because that's what most people mean when they say racist. They're not thinking about systemic structures. They just mean personal hatred. Right. And I said, I don't think that the average Trump voter is any more racist than the average liberal. I think that is a fairy tale that Democrats and liberals tell themselves so that they can sleep well at night. Because I've worked in enough academic spaces to know that white liberals can be amongst the most racist people that you will ever encounter. You can hear Malcolm's influence on my thinking, right, in framing it that way. And I said, here's what I think, Jennifer. I said, I think that your average Republican voter does not see a difference between blue criminals and red criminals. And all other things being equal, would rather pay lower taxes. And she laughed. She said, yeah, that's basically it. I said, well, what if I told you we could lower your personal income taxes and your small business taxes with one simple step? She said, what is it? I said, I'm going to stop reaching in your pocket, taking a big cut out of your check, and handing it to Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, the weapons manufacturers, after first laundering it through foreign genocides. She said, yeah, I've seen some of those pictures of those kids. It's terrifying. So that's when her husband, Steve, really got interested because I was talking about lowering taxes. And then we have this conversation that is about, not about a culture war, but about how you have policies that serve ordinary working class Americans. That's not about dividing people on fake culture war issues. 45-minute flight. The flight ended with Steve, as I'm walking off the plane, says, so first of all, they organized a Green Party rally in their town of Flagstaff, Arizona, on the basis of this 45-minute conversation. And as I'm getting off the plane, Steve says, wait, we got to take a selfie with you. You're going to be the first Muslim president of the United States of America. That's what he said. Okay. I still have the picture on my phone. So I used exactly that pitch in Instagram Reels. And like it resonates because the Democrats like to pretend that the racists and the bad guys are over there. I can't have any illusions about that. And because of that, they think that there's some kind of moral failing when you vote against Team Blue. I don't believe that because I don't believe in Team Blue any more than I believe in Team Red.
That's fascinating. I mean, I have been, from outside, I've been looking at the turn within the MAGA Right.
Yes.
And how
against Israel,
yeah. With, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, you've got these, and it's fascinating to see because, of course, maybe even 3 years ago, we'd never have imagined
unimaginable
that there would be a dent to Zionism on the political right.
Yeah.
So is that really, in a sense, that's arguing what you're arguing? Most sensible people, most good-minded people can see that American foreign policy is
rotten to the core, and been purchased by foreign powers and controlled by weapons manufacturers, and they don't want any part of it.
Right.
And out of the entire gubernatorial field that actually has a chance to be competitive in the election, you essentially have 6. Now one of the Democrat candidates has dropped out. You've got 6 Democrat candidates, 2 Republican candidates, and myself. Right? All 8 of the establishment candidates, both from blue and red, are Zionists. They've all given their I stand with Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself. And even on the supposed right, especially in the younger demographics, the opposition to having your elected officials be on the payroll of a foreign government, the resistance to that is massive. So we're going to engage a lot of white working class voters, not just Bernie Trump voters, people that voted for Bernie in a 2016 primary, but then voted for the Trump in the general. Yeah. But we're going to get a lot of Trump voters, people that have voted for Trump twice. And, they don't even have to be the people that see the escalations in fascism as problematic. They can literally just be people that are thinking this government and the way that they do it is too expensive, too corrupt, and too wasteful. Last thing I'll just say on this is, like, if you go to the bottom of our webpage, butchwareforgov.com, it says solidarity beyond identity and ideology. Mm-hmm. Because the truth of the matter is that I'm not expecting everybody that votes for me to agree with my political ideology any more than I expect them to share my personal faith, right? But the kind of solidarity that we're going to need to knock these corrupt Zionists and corporate-owned stooges out of power is a kind of solidarity that the Democrats and Republicans and their culture war makes impossible. So I'm going to make an appeal that you don't have to choose between conservative extremists or liberal extremists. You can just take a party that's invested in common sense policies that are beneficial for all working Californians.
You mentioned Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
What's your opinion of Bernie Sanders?
I think that Bernie Sanders in 2016 really provided the blueprint for exactly the kind of populist politics that is animating the way that I'm running this campaign, and he showed that it can be very effective. I think that the problem with Bernie is twofold. One, Bernie's still a Zionist. Mm-hmm. He's a liberal Zionist, but he's still a Zionist. Yeah. And he this is the reason why leftist thinker Michael Parenti in the 90s condemned Bernie, because Bernie even then was rubber stamping Bill Clinton's imperial wars, right? So Bernie has always been problematic when it came to foreign policy, but he had a good approach to kind of unifying the working class here. The bigger problem with Bernie, frankly, is that Bernie ran as a Democrat. Right. Even though he's independent, he caucuses with the Democrats, and he allowed the corporate wing of the Democrat Party to muscle him out. Some of our oldest Green Party members and core volunteers on the campaign are people that organized for Bernie in 2016 and were in the room with him. I believe it was in Philadelphia when he said, we're giving all of our delegates over to Hillary. People screamed in that room. Yeah. They were like, that's what we've been fighting against this whole time. And Bernie said, that's just how the game is played. And so he knuckled under to the corporate-owned wing. And that goes back to that logic that your unnamed colleague suggested, is just, why not work with the established Democrat? Well, if Bernie couldn't break the Democrats, you think Mamdani's going to? If Bernie couldn't break the Democrats, you think that with the billionaire money and the corporate money, and they're even more aggressively warmongering in the Middle East than the Republicans have. They're slaughtering our people and have been for generations. How Muslims can continue to co-sign for the imperialist slaughter of Muslims is beyond me, frankly. We have to have the courage and the audacity to fight for something that's independent. Just like Malcolm said, not as Democrat, not as Republican, but independent of that structure.
Mamdani, your thoughts on Mamdani?
My thoughts on Mamdani have not fundamentally changed. I said before the election that I'm rooting for Mamdani. And I was rooting for him at that time because he has all of the kind of anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist bona fides. I know his dad, Mahmoud Mamdani. He was an academic mentor for me at different positions in my early career. Not a close mentor, but a valuable one. I did events with him at Columbia. He did events with me at Michigan. And I know that he, this is an African as well, raised in Uganda. So Mahmoud is one of those analysts that understands anti-colonial thinking and resistance. So I know that Zoran's been trained right. At the same time, people in the Muslim community in New York City, mutuals, swore and vouched for Mamdani's personal integrity, his character, his sincerity. So I said that I'm rooting for him. And I was and I am, but you've already seen how he has started to, make more apologetic statements about Israel. Israel has a right to exist. He won't talk about globalizing the Intifada. And when he explains why not, he spouts a bunch of Islamophobic, tropes about bus bombings in Haifa and how he doesn't want that coming to New York City and all of these things. Madness. And that is, I've called it the AOCification of Mamdani. The AOC, she starts out as, a radical on all these points, but eventually she becomes AOC Pelosi. She becomes the new Nancy Pelosi, yeah. Right? And under the influence, I fear, of, populist centrists, essentially, like Ocasio-Cortez and Sanders. What my conclusion the day after the election was, I said, listen, I'm rooting for Zoran because I know the people of New York need something other than the status quo. I said, but my analysis as a historian is either that there's only three outcomes. He breaks the party breaks him, or he leaves the party.
And what do you think is the most likely outcome?
The middle one.
Really?
And I think that that's the one that we're seeing the most signs of. He's already giving ground. And then he said that he apologized to the NYPD for calling them racist after the Floyd uprisings, which as a black man, that one was hard to stomach. Who are you, suburban, wealthy, bourgeois kid, to now apologize to the NYPD when they've been stopping and frisking and locking up my folk, when they've been carrying out and prosecuting a centuries-long war against black people? And that was actually my analysis. My analysis of why I feared Mamdani would fold had nothing to do with his politics. It had to do with his class positioning. I don't think that the average person raised in that environment understands how hard you have to fight these people if you are going to survive. Whereas where I was raised and how I was raised, I understand that you are in a fight for your life when you are fighting against white supremacy and imperialism and capitalism. You are in a fight for your very life, and that can turn on a dime in an interaction with the NYPD or the IDF.
Can I please talk about Trump's America?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Because in this conversation, there is the specter of fascism.
Yes.
The idea that Trump's America is moving in a very authoritarian direction with executive orders. And he's chased a lot of his former allies who've now become enemies, like John Bolton. He's using a form of lawfare, I suppose, against them. What seems like a paramilitary mob has sort of descended on lots of cities. You've got the National Guard
occupations
on the one hand, and then you've got ICE. I was in Chicago and I saw these ICE troops, effectively, or like they look like SS soldiers. Some of the videos coming out of ICE arrests in particular,
horrific,
of the Latino community is horrific, right? So we're seeing the specter of fascism here in the US. Now, historically, at least, whenever I've spoken to Muslims, they've always said to me that, look, we've got the US Constitution, and the US Constitution will, at the end of the day, guarantee the basic civil liberties of all of us.
What a marvelously naive perspective to hold.
Tell me.
Well, I mean, W.E.B. Du Bois, great black intellectual, probably says maybe in 47 that fascism has nothing on good old-fashioned American white supremacy.
Yeah.
When he watches what's taking place in Europe unfolding, and Langston Hughes, the great African-American poet, says the exact same thing in exact same period. As a black person, you can't have any illusions about a descent into fascism. I mean, there were Democrat presidents in office. Bill Clinton was president when I was stopped 17 times for driving while black and never ticketed. Yeah. And in one of those interactions, the police officer drew his service weapon and pointed it directly at my face when I reached in my jacket to produce the identification that he asked me to produce. Yeah. I never broke a law. I was just being stalked. The same way that immigration authorities stalk, brown people, they've been stalking black people for a long time. Yeah. So the truth is that America is reverting to its pure original barbarism. It is, enacting a theatrics of visible white supremacist power as opposed to concealed and hidden white supremacist power. That difference, again, between the fox that dissimulates and the wolf that just bares its teeth. So the truth is Trump's, even with the escalations of ICE, Trump is still chasing Obama-era deportation records. Now, I am concerned, of course, with the massive increase in funding for ICE, right? This is definitely an escalation in authoritarianism, but it's not any kind of new fascism. It was Democrats that were sending riot troops to my campus at UCSB, 200 cops in riot gear in a blue state to remove 30 unarmed kids from an encampment. It's been blue state governors and mayors that have been endorsing these cop cities that they've been built all around the country, whose function is just state repression. So I can't narrowly conceive of fascism as being just the Team Red issue. Now, the authoritarian escalations of Trump, we do need opposition to those. And I've said on the record any number of times that as governor of the state of California, I would not obey any unconstitutional federal orders. So therefore, ICE is going to have to go through every lawyer and law enforcement agent in the state before they touch a hair on the head of any California resident, if you leave it up to me. But what's happening now under Team Blue, to the point, is that while they make lip service of opposing Trump and stage no kings rallies, Gavin Newsom has and municipal Democrat authorities have actually been enabling LAPD, LASD, state police forces. They've been helping ICE. They've been providing logistical information to ICE. AB 15 was a bill that Gavin Newsom swore to veto. It prohibited coordination between the California Department of Corrections and ICE. So they talk like they're going to resist, but they're not going to resist. And that is also part of understanding the problem that we're in, is that Trump is able to keep pushing the limits further and further because the Democrats are never going to show any real substantive opposition, because what would be required to do so would alienate the corporate donors right? And the same capitalist powers that back the Republicans. So real opposition can't come from them. So we're left without real opposition.
I mean, isn't it scary in a way? I mean, Donald Trump, I get the point you're making.
Yeah,
that,
please.
Both sides have their authoritarianism, and both sides have got their fascistic,
pedigree.
Right? So, I get that point. And I think the Gaza demonstrations showed very clearly, that Democrats can be as harsh as Republicans can be when it comes to protecting Zionism.
Sure.
But having said that, isn't it scary in a way? Isn't it frightening to see, just how much believers of state are now siding with Trump and his administration? He's got a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court. He's got majorities in both houses. Fine, it's not an overall majority in the Senate, but it's still the overuse of executive orders. It seems to me that, I mean, I used to follow American politics very closely, and you would know about lots and lots of bills going through the legislature. That seems to have disappeared now. I mean, most of what's happening in this administration is coming out the White House rather than through Congress. So I suppose the argument goes that there is, and then you've got the Project 2025 of the Heritage Foundation.
Sure.
So all of that comes together to concoct a theory that there is something exceptional about this Trump administration, and minorities in particular have to be very careful about the trajectory, I suppose, of Trump and the people around him.
I would never dispute that Trump isn't like a clear and present danger. And it's obvious that he is consolidating power in all kinds of autocratic ways. But that really just underlines my prior point, is that how did we end up in this position?
Right.
That we are dealing with unchecked autocratic escalations of power? Well, let's go back to 2016. Hillary Clinton's Pied Piper strategy, where she handpicked Donald Trump as the candidate that she wanted to run against. And they promoted Trump thinking that a more extremist candidate would give them a better chance. How's that looking now, right? Tens of millions of dollars that the Democrats pumped into far-right extremist congressional candidates that were running as Republicans, thinking that it was going to give them easier competition. The truth is that they made this monster. They cannot defend us against it. So it's not that I'm saying that they're both the same. I am saying that they're both equally evil and fundamentally evil. I'm not saying that their modality or their theatrics of power is the same. I'm saying that one is naked, the other one is concealed. But in the end, the only thing that is going to get the knee off the necks of our brothers and sisters in Palestine or here is a dismantling of the system that holds both together, right? In the end, the relationship between Team Blue and Team Red is that one steals, the other holds the bag. They are partners in crime. And if you were to make a Venn diagram, circles that map the donor base of the Republicans and the Democrats, you would essentially be staring at a single circle. AIPAC would be in the middle of it, and the arms manufacturers would be circling around AIPAC. And it's the reason why, like Blackstone and BlackRock, these massive private equity firms, said before the 2024 presidential election that from their standpoint, it didn't matter whether the Democrats won or the Republicans won. This is all like about the theatrics of power, but nothing is moving in the underlying givens of imperialist slaughter and extraction abroad, capital, increasingly intensified capitalist exploitation, right? The wealth gap in the state of California has grown more under Team Blue than it did under Team Red. There are 9 billionaires, 9 households that control $683 billion worth of wealth just in Silicon Valley. California has 186 billionaires and 187,000 homeless people. That's been under Democratic administrations. So it just all depends on how you understand what oppression looks like. If it's about the theatrics of oppression, yeah, Trump takes, second to none. If it's about the actual outcomes of oppression, Team Blue are still heavyweight champions of the world.
How much do you interface with MAGA supporters? I mean, you've talked about how there is a conversation to be had with these people, with people who've grown tired of America's imperial commitments abroad, who resolve from empire, who believe that empire has actually been a bad deal for Americans and working class people across this country. Like from your standpoint, because it seems to me that MAGA as an idea, it's still shaping, it's still forming, and this anti-Zionism that's developing within that MAGA trend is pretty significant. Right? Like how much do you suggest, or how much do you think we should be engaging with those people? You know, the
couple on the plane.
The couple on the plane, right?
See, I don't think that they're MAGA. I think that they're just default Republicans.
Right.
And if I were to break that sort of down, I think that there is a committed white Christian nationalist, Christian Zionist, white supremacist kernel and core that is untouchable for us. Untouchable.
Right.
And you're wasting your time if you try to appeal to that group. They are open enemies to you. They hate you not because of your policies or anything you do. They hate you because of who you are.
But, you know, one would have said that about Tucker Carlson maybe 2 years ago.
I still think that about Tucker Carlson, because Tucker Carlson might have become an anti-Zionist, but he's still deeply anti-Black in all of his politics. He hasn't apologized for justifying the police murder of every single Black person. Candace Owens hasn't apologized for saying that George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose rather than 8 minutes and 46 seconds of Derek Chauvin choking George Floyd on camera for us all to see. These people are still white supremacists. It's just that their version of white supremacy is open to anti-Zionism, because actually at the core of white supremacy is actual anti-Semitism. And it is very easy for actual white supremacists to turn on Jews. And as much of their pivot is about two things. Conservative isolationism, which is about screw the rest of the world, this is about America. And another part of it is, frankly, like Candace Owens was anti-Semitic before she figured out that Israel is the bad guy in Israel-Palestine conflicts. So I'm reticent, and I know that a lot of people, see it as a salutary move that Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens are now speaking against, they're not even speaking against the occupation. They were mostly arguing for a ceasefire, and especially they argue for Zionist control over American politics, which sits very nicely in a traditional anti-Semitic argument about a cabal of Jews that control the world, right? That sits very nicely for their arguments. What they'll never say is the other part, which is what Caspar Weinberger, Reagan's defense secretary, said in '82, which is that Israel is America's unsinkable battleship in the Middle East. They will never understand Zionism as a fundamental expression of white supremacy rather than the other way around. But that's how Malcolm understood it. Malcolm said in his field notebooks when he came back from Khan Yunis, he said that this is a white Jewish population being empowered by white imperialists to knock brown Arabs off their land. So Malcolm understood Zionism as an ethnic variant of white supremacy, the same way that German Nazism was an ethnic variant of white supremacy, the same way that British imperialism functionalized an ethnic variant of white supremacy. In the anti-imperialist version of anti-Zionism, we are always clear about the fact that Israel is serving very specific purposes for Western imperial interests. James Baldwin, 1979, open letter to the born again, said the state of Israel was not created for the salvation of the Jews. The state of Israel was created for the salvation of Western interests. So an actual anti-imperialist anti-Zionism recognizes that if the genocide is ongoing in Palestine, it's because the U.S. continues to want it. It's because the U.S. continues to provide the arms, because the U.S. continues to utilize the IDF as a protection force for resource extraction, right? That it's a tool of Western imperialism. The version of anti-Zionism that the unrepentant white supremacists focus on is the Zionist control over the U.S. government, as though the tail is wagging the dog. And while it's true that there's a massive amount of compromise that Zionists have on politicians and that they spend insane amounts of money purchasing influence, the truth is that if the military-industrial complex of the United States of America no longer found it in their strategic interest to be allied with Israel, we wouldn't hear so much as another peep from the Zionists.
You've used the term white supremacy
Yes.
A number of times. For those who are not familiar with the structural idea, what is white supremacy?
White supremacy is not about racism as an ideological construct.
Yeah.
It's about a system of politics and societal organization that produces outcomes that favor white people and white-skinned people. And it's not just something that white people are complicit in. Bell Hooks, the great African-American female theorist, said white supremacy isn't just a white people's problem. White supremacy is threaded through our institutions, and that's why they systematically produce outcomes of a certain kind. So when I'm talking about white supremacy, I'm not just talking about racism, although racism is a feature of white supremacy. I'm talking about a structure that is tethered to imperialism, that's tethered to class structures that produce racialized groups that will then labor for low wages. It tethers together the reason why there are ongoing genocides in Sudan and Congo, as well as in Palestine. It brings that together with the reason why we have mass incarceration in the United States that's predominantly targeted at Black and brown communities. Those are all about outcomes, geopolitical and economic and social outcomes. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about white supremacy. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that, because for me, the problem is not white people.
Right.
The problem is white supremacy.
Right.
I don't hate white people. I hate white supremacy deeply.
Yeah. Okay, because I think that's really important. So, in that sense, you're not appealing to non-white voters here. You're appealing to...
No, I'm appealing to everybody. I'm appealing to everyone. And this is another kind of misunderstood piece of the history of white supremacy as a set of practices, right? Historians of America will talk about Bacon's Rebellion as being this pivotal moment in the history of white supremacy. And it happens in the early, kind of settler colony of Virginia, which is that at that time, indigenous North Americans and enslaved Africans and white indentured servants all make common cause against the white ruling class in an uprising. And immediately after that, European descended property owners start to try to create distinctions between the European indentured servants and the enslaved Africans. They start to operationalize white supremacy as a way of getting buy-in from white people that did not own property. They needed to incorporate them into the system. And part of that is then adopting this ideology of racial supremacy that also does not serve the actual interests of most white working class people, never has and never will, right? Because that same predominantly white ruling class has been happy to throw Appalachia away. It's been happy to get Appalachia addicted on opioids the same way that it dumped crack cocaine into Black communities because of a CIA-led war against the Contras in Nicaragua that Congress would not fund. And so instead, the CIA got in the business of selling cocaine in order to fund their war, right? They're perfectly willing to throw white working class people away. And that's also a fundamental dynamic in why so many white working class people have gone to the Republicans, because the Democrats, with Bill Clinton, with NAFTA, just decided to completely divest from like white working class communities and working class communities of all colors, and instead take this neoliberal model. They're going to privatize everything. They're going to ship jobs offshore because that's where corporations are going to make the most profit. And it leaves like a white working class that is impoverished in comparison to where it used to stand. Well, where do you think that they're going to turn for answers except to a demagogue like Trump? And calling those people, racist is just part of that liberal bedtime story that they tell themselves, because it's actually the Democrats that abandon the working class irrespective of skin color. And they have created the monster that they now pretend to be fighting.
So you'll be against NAFTA. You're against these free trade agreements, these sort of neoliberal free trade agreements.
Right. So I'm sorry to interrupt, please. Well, so people have a lot of misconceptions about neoliberalism. So being a history professor, I'll just unpack briefly, right?
Yeah.
So the word neoliberal makes it sound like you're just talking about a new kind of liberal, and it makes it sound like you're in a social conversation about liberals and conservatives.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with that. It's about economic policy and philosophy. Neoliberalism, the person who popularized it in American political discourse was Reagan. Reagan referred to trickle-down economics. He would talk about a rising tide lifting all boats. And that's what neoliberalism is. It's basically offloading a bunch of public sector concerns like healthcare and other things onto the private sector. And it's rooted in the idea that government's going to mess everything up. Private sector is going to be more efficient. So therefore, let's just offload onto the private sector a bunch of things that the government used to do. And we're going to deregulate the private sector and let them do whatever they want. So we're not going to make strategic plans about what's good for the working class in America. We're going to let these corporations maximize their profit, which means call centers in India, sweatshops in China, right? And that's what's going to allow them to maximize the profit. Well, that absolutely guts the American working class. And that neoliberalism is both parties. That's not just the liberal party, that's both parties. The Republicans and the Democrats are both neoliberal in their economic approach.
Yeah.
And just one last little footnote on this, just as a historian, Reagan called it trickle-down economics, which is silly, because it never actually trickles down, right?
Yeah.
They just keep the money, and we're finding that now. But in the 19th century, they actually called this ridiculous economic philosophy, where you prioritize privatization and allow the rich to get richer, so that it will trickle down to the rest. They called it horse and sparrow theory, with the idea, the image being that you stuff a horse's mouth full of so many oats that it can't digest them, and the sparrows come and pick out what they need from the feces. And that's where we are. We're picking through the scraps of what the billionaire class lets us have.
Bilal, Butch, do you feel that your form of radicalism, let's say, will really have traction in a state like California, in the sense that California has a GDP which is bigger than most countries in the world? I think its GDP it's bigger than the United Kingdom.
For the record, the GDP of the state of California, if each of the 50 states was an independent republic, it would be the third largest economy in the world.
Wow.
After China and Germany.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then that underscores the potential challenge here. You've got a very rich state, a state that has plenty of billionaires.
Yeah.
And then you've got someone like yourself who's basically talking against neoliberalism, and you want a different type of economic system and economic order. Is there enough currency on the street? Are there enough people out there in this state, to recognize your type of politics?
The first thing, before I answer that part of the question, I just want to reset it. As Muslims, the Quran is this eruption, an inbursting, IRRUPTION. It comes from the unseen world and it explodes into the seen world and changes the trajectory of the seen world. And in that Quran, there's this overwhelming and overpowering critique of materialist consumption, greed, and excess, and stern warnings of those who commit injustice and oppression and those who give into their greed. So even if I thought that there was no hope of victory, my moral responsibility would be to stand and bear witness, because the Muslim is the shaheed, the one that bears witness for the oppressed against the oppressor from the day of creation to the day of resurrection. That is our mandate with our Lord. And having said that, so now I'm just literally back where I was when I was 15. That was the Quran on one night. The previous night was Malcolm. And what's Malcolm say? Malcolm says, we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. And then Malcolm says, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. Never let the man that you are against form your opinions for you. The truth is that this narrative that we somehow can't resist these forces emerges directly from the mouth of those forces themselves. Billionaires are few in number, right? And there is overwhelming support for these kind of populist, they're not even populist, like these aren't left policies from the standpoint of ordinary voters. Like universal health care is an 80-20 issue. Affordable housing is an 80-20 issue, right? These are things that are right down the center for your average working class Californian. It's just that there are vested moneyed interests that are opposed to them. But I would argue that in this moment, where the corporate takeover of media, used to be 50 media companies controlling 90% of the media in 1983. Now it's 5 in 2025. 4 Zionists control all of social media, essentially. That actually the place where the people can make their voices heard most effectively is in elections, because the corporate takeover has been so complete in other domains. And then the last part of my answer to this is that one of the wealthy donors in the Muslim community, and we've had tremendous support, generous support from the Muslim community for our campaign. One of the wealthiest donors from the Muslim community, I asked him the same question. I said, does this, like the way that I'm talking, like a 2%, increase on the tax for billionaires, because a 2% increase in the tax on those 186 billionaires would make it so that no one that makes 100K or less in the state of California would pay a penny of state taxes, right? There's all kinds of ways that you can, do incredible things if you just make the billionaires pay literally their fair share, not even excessive amounts. Like Tesla ends up paying like a 0.75 effective tax rate, where your average working Joe pays 30% of his check. We're covering their taxes right now. So when I asked him about this, he said, no, it doesn't make me afraid at all. He said, quite the contrary. He said, the ruling class always underestimates how close the people are to revolution when wealth inequalities reach the scale that they are currently at. He said, someone that talks like you about the reality of people's ordinary people's suffering is the only person that I think is sane in this kind of environment. And what does that mean? The state of California, yes, 3rd highest GDP if all of the states were independent. But the state of California has the highest rate of wealth inequality of any of the 50 states in the union. And in fact, is tied with the state of Louisiana for the highest poverty rates. Wow. How? How is that possible? And you can't blame that on the Republicans. This has been a state that had Democrat supermajorities for 40 years. Has had Democrats in the governor's mansion for almost the entirety of that time. Brief glimpses of, the governor, Schwarzenegger, in there, right? Yes. This has been Team Blue that has driven the economy into the ground for ordinary people. And that's why, like, for example, when I spoke at the SEIU Local 1000 Candidate Forum, 1,000 union members in a union hall, being streamed to 3 other union halls throughout the state. And I'm up there with Katie Porter and the 6 other Democrats, 3.5 hours answering every question. And I'm quoting Malcolm to him and talking exactly this kind of, universal housing and all of the radical stuff that you hear me saying. They closed the door and did the vote. When they tallied up the vote, best candidate, hands down won. Because this is not an alienating message for your average working class person. This is the only thing that sounds sane to your average working class person.
Professor Butch Ware, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best for the election to come, inshallah.
Barakallah feek, Sidi. And I just have to say, it's been a real honor to be able to sit and share space and time with you and to be able to lay out my case. for our brothers and sisters in Islam and everyone that's Islam adjacent. The Muslims are in a position to do something extraordinary if we would seize the opportunity.
Inshallah.
Appreciate you.
Assalamu alaikum. Now you've reached the end of this show, and the fact that you've stayed until the very end tells me that you truly believe in our work. Please consider making a one-off donation or becoming a member by visiting thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Now your contributions give you exclusive behind-the-scenes access and the ability to ask questions to our guests, and monthly calls with myself, my team, and our guests like Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair, and keep us in your du'as.